Have you ever had an experience with your mother growing up where something happened with your body that you couldn't quite explain, but you just know it didn't really feel right? Today, I want to talk about something that almost never gets discussed, and that is mother-daughter sexual abuse, and why survivors of this specific type of abuse who grow up as the unprotected child often feel deeply confused about what actually happened to them. So maybe there were some moments for you where, you remember your mom touching your body in a particular way that made you feel uncomfortable, or maybe she insisted on seeing your body or checking your body even when you were old enough to understand what privacy was and to want to have privacy and even state that you wanted privacy. Perhaps she said things about your body or your development that left you feeling exposed or intruded on or embarrassed. And maybe even now as an adult, there's still part of you that's kind of wondering, did something actually happen here, or am I misunderstanding what that was? And this is something I see quite often with the women that I work with in my practice, Centering Healing, where there's a lot of fuzziness, a lot of confusion, a lot of gray about what exactly happened between them and their mother growing up. They just know that to this day they feel very uneasy in particular situations when they are around their mother or have reminders of being touched in a certain way or being looked at in a certain way. And so when these violations happen within the relationship that is supposed to protect the body, this creates a lot of really deep confusion within our nervous systems about what closeness is, what safety is, and what even safe touch is. Where I often like to start with the women I work with is kind of reminding them about why this confusion is so overwhelming. If we think about it, the relationship between mother and child, it starts even before we are born. During pregnancy, our developing nervous systems are already oriented towards our mother's body, our physiology, our breathing, our heart rate, metabolism, blood pressure. All of this develops in the rhythm of our mother's breathing and her heart rate and her blood pressure. And so we become especially attuned to our mothers, and they have a unique gift at being able to kind of self-soothe because we've had all this time in the womb to effectively connect with each other. So as a result, mothers become kind of like the primary regulator of our nervous systems when we are infants. And so as we get older, right, she's the one who's typically feeding and soothing and bathing and rocking and doing all these things that meet our physiological needs that merge into this internal sense of feeling like that we are loved and that we matter. This is why, from the nervous system's perspective, the proximity to our caregivers, particularly our mother, equals survival. And so when people think about mothers, they have this image of this, nurturing and protective and selfless woman, which is why this type of abuse in this relationship becomes so difficult for survivors to kind of recognize. It's because it often goes against our very natural instincts, and so people simply just don't expect it. And so even now, there's so little research on this type of abuse. I found very little when I was first starting to work with these survivors, and that was over a decade ago. And so much of what I learned was from listening to the strong women who came into my practice, as well as my learning and studying neurobiology and attachment and somatic experiencing, Bruce Perry's NMT. But really a lot of it came from the women themselves and the things that they shared with me that helped me kind of formulate my own way of helping these women survive, which also includes helping them recognize what they experienced, whether or not this is abuse. And in this channel, we believe women, we believe survivors. And that is often one of the first steps because it's so unknown that many therapists who work with trauma, who work with child sexual abuse survivors, don't even really know what to do. So I want to kind of start with when this type of abuse often begins. So for many survivors, the violations often begin very early, sometimes even during infancy, but it could also happen during the toddler years. That's more common, and then also during early childhood, so you're talking about 5 to 8. And so when abuse happens early, so again, we're talking about before the age of 5, when we have our neurons firing and wiring very, very rapidly, these experiences are almost entirely stored in the body just because we don't have the full depth of language yet. So this is just how development works, right? It starts in utero with the brainstem and the diencephalon, breathing, heart rate, metabolism, temperature. All of this starts when we are in our mother's wombs, and it continues throughout our first year of life. At the same time, right after birth, and continuing on, we start to develop our limbic system, and this is where our attachment system lives. This is also where we harness our emotions. Emotions are here. All of this begins to develop, and building upon this kind of early foundation is our cortex, right? It is our thinking brain. It's the one that takes the longest to fully mature and develop. But what happens with our cortex and the way it develops is it builds upon these earlier structures. So what's happening with the limbic system and what's happening with the brainstem. So when survivors come into my office and they talk about only having maybe fuzzy memories, or when something happens, they feel it in their bodies, but they don't really know how to make sense, like there's no real language, or they're kind of confused, or I don't know what's going on. This is actually quite common, just because when we are abused prior to age 5, we just don't really have adequate language like we do as adults to communicate what happens, right? We're just not developmentally sophisticated enough to describe, we might not even know what the body parts are, right? Like it's if you've ever been around a little kid, you understand just how little they know and how innocent they are. So now I kind of want to move into talking about the cycle that many of the survivors that I work with, what they experience. So one of the patterns that the women that I work with will recognize, I kind of explain it kind of like the cycle of abuse. It follows a similar dynamic. So the relationship between mother and daughter, it begins kind of in this normal caregiving place. The mother is affectionate in a non-violating way. She might be able to give hugs and kisses and compliments that actually don't make you feel uneasy, but slowly over time, the boundaries start to blur. The hugs start to go from comforting into intrusive, or the kisses, maybe they lingered, or they maybe moved to other parts of the body. Maybe the compliments shifted to being maybe comments about your body. The touch might have lingered. There might have been like this desire for your mom to be close to you, standing closer, looking longer, finding reasons to be physically close. And so I call this kind of like the ramping up phase. And you might have started to notice the shifts because they just felt different in your body. Because again, that's the part our bodies just know. This is where the trauma is stored, right? So you might, in those instances, have tried to get away or say no, but you are met with resistance. And I want to be clear, the resistance doesn't even have to be physical, like something really aggressive, but it could also be a lot of guilt, like, but I just want to give you a hug, or you're hurting my feelings, like things like that, which will kind of lull you in to doing some type of caretaking or acquiescing. And so I just want to make it clear that it's not always like something physical, like a physical force situation. Sometimes it can be verbal like that too. And so in this moment, your nervous system is already trying to protect you. And so we even as kids, we try to kind of move away, push your hand away, get away somehow. But and it's good. We have those early fight experiences. But again, when we're younger, we can't get away from our caregivers. And so we often get kind of stuck in freeze. So we have the urge to respond, we have the urge to get away, but because we can't, we freeze. And that's the body's way of protecting itself until the threat passes. So in that moment, right, the hug, the kiss, the violation, it happens. Once that violation happens, you might notice your mother's behavior changed. She might have became angry or critical, rejecting. Sometimes she might have been punishing. It's been my experience again that this reaction kind of reflects the mom's like your mom's shame about what happened. Almost like on some level she knows that what she has done is wrong and she feels bad about it. And sometimes it's a recognition that she even caused you harm, but more often it's the shame that she kind of couldn't stop the urge. And so then you get some of this angry reactive, why am I losing the word? Not aggressive, but you know, sometimes I can't find the word. Welcome to what it's like to even be in session with me. So things go back to normal after this, right? Mother becomes affectionate and caring in this kind of safe way. And that's sort of the cycle. If you're able to kind of map it out, you look in your childhood, you might notice that that's a cycle. That's not for everybody, but it is common enough that I was able to kind of track it and note it for many of the women that I've worked with over the years. And so on your end, right, you are the child who never knew when this change was going to happen. And so instinctively you become more tense with certain interactions, or you might become hypervigilant, scanning around, waiting for things to happen, right? We're like bracing, we're tense. And you become increasingly disconnected from your body as a way of protecting yourself. Another thing I want to talk about is safe touch versus intrusive touch. Because again, there's often a lot of confusion about what happened. So I just want to say that it's normal for mothers to hug, kiss, comfort their children. And this type of touch, we might feel warm, calm, settled, at ease, loose, happy. We naturally seek it out, move towards comfort. That is often what happens with safe touch. You just feel pleasant, happy. You feel safe, held in your body. On the other hand, intrusive touch is kind of the opposite. The hug doesn't make us feel better, but it makes us feel worse. It makes us feel scared or tense, cold. We naturally want to move away from it. We might feel disconnected, want to move out of our bodies. We don't want to move towards that person for comfort. In fact, if they try to move towards us, we are going the opposite direction. It just doesn't feel good in our body. Another thing that I want to say too, because again, a lot of women have a lot of questions. As babies, toddlers, we depend on our parents. So our mom being able to bathe us, dress us, all of that is natural. But as we get older, get into the toddler years, 1 to 3 to 4 years old, you start to see this increase in autonomy. I can do it myself. I want to do. And usually even by 5, kids have an understanding, a natural, doesn't matter what family you grow up in, they start to have this idea of like, this is my body and I want to keep it safe. I want to protect it. I want to keep it private. And so they'll start to do things like not want to change in front of you, or not want you to bathe them, like that. All of that is normal development. And so if during those times it was hard, for lack of a better word, for your mother to kind of let you go and develop natural autonomy, there was resistance there, she might have lingered, like you felt intruded upon, that is not uncommon. And this is often, this is why I also highlighted the talking about the coercion from the mother, not always being physical coercion, but saying, but I'm your mom, but I'm just trying to take care of you, but I want to make sure you did it the right way. Like they come up with all of these things that sound like they make sense, but they actually kind of go against the toddler's natural desire for independence and autonomy, which is again part of the normal developmental sequence that we all go through as we move from vulnerable dependent babies into adulthood. In non-violating households, mothers will respect, right? They'll respect the child's autonomy. They'll stop when the child says no, without the guilt, without the shame. In fact, they will encourage it. Oh, you're such a big boy. Oh, you're such a big girl, right? That is to be expected. If you didn't really experience that during your childhood, because of the violations, because of the intrusion, I want you to know that, you are not the only one, and that is very, very common. A little bit I touched on before about the manipulation that makes it hard for us to say no to our mothers. Another pattern that I see is the way that the violating mother often uses words or phrases that sound loving on the surface. So she might say something like, I'm just trying to make sure you're okay because I love you so much. I understand why you don't want me to look, but I'm your mother. And then you look on her face and she looks sad or she looks pitiful. And this kind of look, might have made you feel like you're hurting her in some way if you tell her no. And so that's actually manipulation. That's coercion. And that is not uncommon. And it works because, and the reason it works is because of our attachment system, as we talked about before, right? We are wired to maintain proximity to our caregivers because they are the connection, right? Connection with them equals safety. And so when our parents look, or in this case, when our mother looks hurt or disappointed, as kids, our nervous system goes, oh my gosh, right? And we literally feel, that's why, you see I go like that. That's often an experience, a body-based experience that we often feel when freeze is about to set in. And what we're experiencing inside is this pressure to repair the relationship. You might give in because of the natural instinct between a parent and a child, between mother and child, mother and daughter, to maintain proximity. And in a healthy parent-child relationship, proximity is safe. Proximity does make us feel better. Closeness does make us feel good. Over time, experiences like this begin forming what I like to call the attachment template. So our attachment template essentially is like the relational blueprint that our nervous system builds during infancy, childhood, that shapes how we understand closeness, safety, and the boundaries in relationships. So for someone who grew up as the unprotected child, the person who was supposed to protect your body was also the person who was crossing your boundaries. And so your nervous system receives two conflicting messages at the same time. Care and violation come from the same person. And this is confusion that gets organized into the attachment template and shows up later in your adult relationships in ways that often feel very confusing to you. So now I want to take a moment just to talk about how this might show up in your life now. So for many women who have survived mother-daughter-child sexual abuse, you might only now start to recognize some of the patterns that are impacting you that are related to your past trauma. So this can include intimate moments where you notice you shut down or you dissociate, feeling tense when someone looks at you or even moves close to you. Some women even avoid being close to not just women, but people in general because they're so sensitized to touch, but also because they've had this experience where their no is not respected. And so they don't even get into situations where they might be forced to set some sort of boundary and then not have that boundary be respected. And so it's not uncommon for survivors to feel confused about whether whether certain interactions are safe or intrusive, which also compounds some of the, desire to move away from people or to be really hypervigilant when you are in a relationship or when you are close to somebody else, because you're just feeling really confused and very overwhelmed and you don't really know what is going on. And so for many survivors, right, their bodies react before the cortex comes online to kind of make sense of it. And so you might be talking to somebody, that you might find attractive. This person might be kind and patient and respectful, but then you feel it in your body, this tightness, right, when they move closer. I want you to kind of think of this as like a conditioned response, right? And so when you grow up in an environment where closeness and touch could suddenly shift into intrusion, your nervous system goes, wait a minute, danger, danger, danger. So instead of kind of relaxing into connection, your body continuously scans and it scans for subtle signals that something might change. And so this is where you might notice your breathing changing, muscles feeling more tense, and a sudden urge to move away. Even if the person in front of you is not your mother, not the abuser, in that moment, when you go from your cortex down to the brainstem, you're just responding because something inside has been triggered. Other survivors describe kind of the opposite, where they are disconnected from their bodies during intimacy, and so instead of feeling this interaction fully, they might feel numb, distant, or like they're watching themselves from the outside. So this is the same nervous system that responded earlier and kept you alive, where leaving was not possible. So this is one of the more lasting effects of mother-daughter sexual abuse and how it's impacted the attachment template that was formed during your childhood. When the person who was responsible for protecting your body was also the person crossing your boundaries, your nervous system learned to like this mixed signal about closeness, safety, and autonomy, and it stays hypervigilant as a result. And so here's a couple things that you can do if you are a survivor of mother-daughter sexual abuse that might help you start to work through some of these conditioned responses and help you find some relief. And so one place you might want to start is starting to just learn your body's signals again, because your nervous system, recognized boundary violations and had to shut down to protect you. So we want to start from the place, right, that your nervous system recognized that a boundary violation was happening, but had to shut it down to protect you. So this became the kind of conditioned response. That doesn't mean that you have to do that all the time. The instinct is still there, it's just dormant. And so what we want to do is like reactivate or bring to life what's already present. So you can start this off by paying attention to moments in your body that you don't feel tense, you don't feel frozen, or you don't feel uncomfortable to touch. You can even start with touching, your own self, your arm, your hand. Stay away from the core, but just getting used to like what it feels like to have safe touch that you're providing for yourself. The second thing I want you to try is just notice when your body feels open or feels guarded before any type of physical contact. And then give yourself permission to kind of pause, to say yes or to say no or to say not right now. So you practice saying what you need and what you want. And so these are things that I teach the women that I work with in my practice centering healing, where we really focus on rebuilding the internal sense of safety within the nervous system with these small acts of choice that you can then build upon when you're in relationships or when you're in connection with another person. You have already practiced being present in your body and what it's like for you to not just assert a boundary, but have that boundary be respected. This is so helpful is because these small moments of choice begin to kind of update that attachment template that was formed earlier in your life, and your nervous system slowly begins to learn that closeness can exist alongside respect and autonomy and safety. And so although experiencing mother-daughter sexual abuse shapes the nervous system and our attachment system in a very specific way, we know that when these violations happen inside the relationship that's supposed to protect us and keep us safe and nurture us, and that the patterns that we kind of exhibit now are just survival adaptations. Once we understand that, we don't judge, we hold curiosity, we thank our body for its wisdom, we can then as adults start to do things differently. We can then go, I have more agency, I'm going to actively do something different, right? And so you don't need to have shame about what happened or how your body has responded in the past. You thank it for its intelligence, and then we go, I've got this, I'm going to do something different. Remember that the nervous system is capable of change. It begins with having new experiences of safety, choice, and respect in your relationships. And this process, it does take time, it takes support, and it takes the right environment where your body can slowly relearn what safe connection actually feels like. And so if you want to understand these patterns more deeply, I talk about them a little bit in my book, Reclaim Your Power. It's down, linked in the description box below, so you can get your copy. It's an ebook, so easy to download. But if you're also somebody who lives in California or Florida and you want to work with me more directly, my information is also in the description box. And again, those are just resources for you to use. You can go on my website as well. I have some things you can download that are free. But just remember that healing is possible. You don't have to do it alone. It's not your fault what happened with your mother. She was wrong. She was the violator. So the responsibility is not on you. And you can heal. You can have safe relationships. You can feel better in your body. You can be connected, happy, healthy with other people without shutting down, freezing, dissociating, being afraid. All of that can change. I've seen it in the work that I do every single day, so I know that it's possible for you. So that is all I have for today. Please like and comment down below. I think I mentioned in another video that I have a Facebook group. The information is also in the description box, where I answer direct questions, but it's also a space for other women who've experienced mother-daughter sexual abuse to feel less alone and to have additional resources and community. And so I try to answer questions weekly that people have. So if you have questions, you can put them here in the comments, or you can join the group and I can answer them there. And again, if you want to work with me directly, my information is in the description box. And with that said, please take care of yourself. I hope you have a good rest of your week, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.